Not every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
What turns a name into a verdict before a single fact is confirmed? How does a stranger 1,000 miles away become certain enough about a young man he has never met to threaten that man's family over the phone? And why, in a case where the official file remains sealed, does the public sound more convinced than the people actually running the investigation? For weeks now, one name has been pushed to the center of the Nolan Wells conversation, without a single charge attached to it. That name is Bart Edmiston Jr. Until recently, his side of this had been almost entirely missing from the version you were being handed. Then his attorney, Russell Latino, sat down for a full televised interview and answered the accusations point by point. I have that interview in its entirety. I also have the distress call released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. The same recording everyone has spent a month arguing over. We're going through both, with no guesswork. If you want the version built on the record instead of the rumor mill, hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Victims right now, because this is where the documents get read out loud.
Bart Edmiston Jr. You've heard that name if you're following the Nolan Wells investigation. The question is, why did you hear it? Did you hear that he was on the boat, the same boat that Nolan was on? Did you hear that he was part of that sea tow call that's out there now? Did you hear that he was part of a conversation that seemed very troubling when you match it to the transcript about what was happening to Nolan Wells maybe on that boat? Because it seems to be going on contemporaneously at the same time as the sea tow call. I'm Chris Cuomo. As recognized by him through his counsel, Russell Latino, who will join us in a moment, but let me set the table. Bart Edmiston has gotten a lot of attention on social media. People believe that he has something to answer for. Did he know the young woman that Nolan Wells may have been with that kept him from going home with his buddies? People don't seem to know her. She wasn't really part of the group, but was she known to Bart Edmiston? Is that why he may have been involved in what happened to Nolan Wells? These are vexing questions, serious allegations. My suggestion to you is, after you watch the upcoming interview, I think you will feel very differently about Bart Edmiston. Why? Because I do. Because I do. That's why. And at this point, it is safe to say I know as much or more than most people covering this investigation. And if you listen long enough, you will hear what I'm hearing about the official autopsy into Nolan Wells and what it is consistent with, what it is suggestive of. I'll tell you this as a spoiler. It is not definitive. I do not know what happened to Nolan Wells. And do the authorities? Maybe. Maybe they do. Then why aren't they saying? We will discuss that. There's good reason, maybe bad reason, depending on your opinion. But what happened to Nolan Wells demands something it is not getting enough of. Integrity of time. Do you want the right answers? The answer has to be yes. Otherwise, GTFO. Okay? But if you want the right answers, you cannot rush accuracy. You lose accuracy as you increase pressure of time. Do they know more than they are telling you? Absolutely. Are they not telling you for bad reason? Not in my estimation. Do I want to know more than I know? Of course. Of course. But that's a fundamental tension, okay? Due process demands the integrity of the process. I love leaks. I love accurate leaks. Why? Because I want to know more. And I do think it helps me as a watchdog on the system. But presenting to a grand jury, it is a secretive proceeding. It is. Just look it up. And I understand now that this prosecutor in Mississippi does it a little differently than some others do. Why? Well, they don't go to the grand jury with everything. And this prosecutor is more inclusive. So you can't read into it going to the grand jury as if it is suggestive that she believes there may have been a crime. I don't think that that's a fair assumption. We'll explain why in this interview. But I do think at the end of the day, there are real questions about how a young, strong college athlete just died and nobody saw anything, nobody knows anything. That strains credulity. It would shock the conscience. Why? Doesn't make sense. I mean, anybody who's paying attention knows it wasn't 4 people go out, 3 men come back, or 5 go out, 4 come back, whatever the math was. And just happens to be the odd man out, the black guy who doesn't come back. It's just not as simple as that. There were hundreds of people where they went. Somebody saw something. Somebody may have seen everything. And the investigators may well know who that person is. But is it Bart Edmiston? Was Bart on that boat helping or hurting? And how do we know? Did Bart know the young lady that may have been with Nolan Wells? Was he jealous? Those pictures you've seen, are they accurate? Are they fair? That audio you've heard, is there a basis? What does Bart Edmiston say about that audio? What does he say? Now you will know. Here is his counsel, Russell Latino, who is representing Bart Edmiston Jr., 21 years old, knew Nolan Wells, was part of that group of boats and friends that went from the coast of Mississippi out to Horn Island together. That is all true. He knew Nolan Wells. He was part of that group. But which part and what happened? Here's what we know. Thank you for joining us once again. And just to be clear with the audience, Russ Latino, real last name, Italian, sounds Latino. I thought it was a marketing ploy. He says no, but it works a lot of different ways. Counsel, thank you for taking the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. All it literally means is somebody that speaks Latin, which, as you well know, originated in Rome. So it's a commoner's last name. Also happens to be the word associated with an entire ethnic group. So it's confusing.
It works a lot of different ways. Let's leave it as that. It's adaptable. So before we go broad, let's go narrow. Is there anything new in terms of your client and your pursuits?
I mean, look, we're monitoring the things that are being said across social media. I think in the next week, there'll be additional activity around some of the accounts that have sort of driven some of the most, what we believe are egregious narratives around my client. I think the reality is that the internet is fickle. And so at some level, as other people insert themselves or other names come out, the internet has a way of rotating between people, and they're assigning different people culpability based on the day.
So, to review, your client was there that day, was not an intimate, was not part of the group that has been framed as being with, framed meaning pictured with Nolan Wells. He was on the boat. He was heard. He was witnessed assisting his buddies who had a problem with water getting into their boat. They called CETO during that call. There is now a version of the call that seems to depict a chaotic scene happening at the same time as the caller's calm kind of pro forma phone call with CETO, which is an assistance service for boaters, about him taking on water. Your client wound up fixing that problem for them. But first, what has been alleged by these accounts that you are monitoring about the involvement of your client?
Yeah, so let me back up and just clarify when we say the boat that could be confusing to some people. I mean, there were hundreds of boats that were out near Horn Island that day, hundreds of people that were out on Horn Island that day celebrating the 4th of July. It's a big holiday weekend. Within a sort of confederacy of friends, there were 3 boats that went out. One of them was piloted by my client, who piloted the boat out and then back to his house. At no point was Nolan Wells, the young man who tragically lost his life, on my client's boat. Around 4:30 that afternoon, one of the boats experienced some problems with its bilge pump and started taking on water. One of the individuals on that boat called my client and asked for help. He proceeded to give help, in part by getting on the transom of the boat and helping to remove the plug at the back of the transom of that boat. For people that don't boat, that may not make, that may not be something they understand, but literally they were just opening up a hole so water would drain out, is the short way of saying this. And then my client got back on the boat that he was piloting and towed the other vessel for a short distance, allowing that water to run off.
Because that's what a podcast is about, is depth. This is completely irrelevant to the events surrounding Nolan Wells, except for this. If Brad, in quotes, or Bart, in quotes, or Billy, in quotes, because your client is referred to by multiple different names, not by you, not by him, but by people on the internet. Sure. If he was not killing Nolan Wells, what else was he doing? This is what we understand. Why would you pull the plug out of a boat? Wouldn't that make it sink? No, depends on the configuration of the hull and the placement of the plug, because sometimes, especially with smaller boats, if they're taking on water, let's say from 20 people drinking beers sitting on the back of it at a party, it can overwhelm a bilge pump that is old, not properly maintained, or has a float switch that gets stuck. And any of those things can happen and you are in a bad position. However, if you know what you're doing, you can pull the plug and then drag the boat so that it goes fast enough that it rises above the level of where the hole is. So instead of allowing water to come in, it allows water to drain out. And then you put the plug back in nice and quick, and you don't have water in the boat anymore, but you do have to address the bilge pump, which you do at a later time. That is an operation that a lot of boaters know, a lot of boaters can do, and that is the involvement that you are saying, counsel, your client had on that boat as it was leaving.
Yeah, that's correct. And the end result.
Are you impressed that I nailed it, by the way? Are you impressed that I nailed it?
Yeah, I want to know who you've been talking to. Are you a boater?
I am a Coast Guard captain, certified, and I have been talking to all of these different people and families and people close to the investigation. And a lot of this is new vocabulary, new vernacular. A lot of people see this story very one-dimensional. Mississippi, racist, one black kid, a lot of white kids, the system protecting, and none of this boating stuff makes sense. The boat wasn't sinking. That's a lie to cover a murder. I understand boating differently. I understand investigating differently. I know the operation you're talking about. It is absolutely plausible that this is what was going on. And there are multiple witnesses who say this is exactly what they witnessed going on.
Well, and let's be very clear about the multiple witnesses, because I think there have been some narratives set based on pictures that are not accurate. So very early on, the narrative that was set was we had one picture with Nolan and 3 friends that are white on the back of a boat. And I think a lot of people developed the thought, okay, 4 friends went out on a boat together.
3 came back.
Only 3 came back, and they went to some desolate place. The reality is they went to a place with hundreds of people. There were way more than 4 friends. It was a mixed race group. So it wasn't just that Nolan was the only black friend in the group.
Which explains some of the pictures out there of mostly white party goers with a black guy, and they just assume if it's a black guy, it must be Nolan. He was the only one. The pictures are not accurate. They're not even, some of them are not even from that day. And you're saying that your client says Nolan was not the only black guy.
Well, I don't know that my client is saying that. I think a lot of witnesses are saying that. I think Trayston Shepard, who is black, has said that he was out there. I think Javon Williams, who is black, has said that he was out there as part of that group. And look, I want to be very careful not to name people who haven't already inserted themselves by talking to media, because this is a witch hunt. I mean, at this point, any name that comes out, people assume that person is a new culpable suspect. But both of those gentlemen have chosen to talk about what happened while they were out there and to make the point that Nolan was, in fact, not the only black friend in that group.
Understood.
I say all that to say that there have been narratives set throughout this discussion that are false narratives and that have allowed people to develop a perception of what Horn Island would have looked like or what Nolan would have experienced that is in no way accurate.
Understood. Why you're proffering that, and consistent with what I understand of the investigation. Now, have to say, frustrating. The unknown is very powerful as a narrative device, especially within the true crime space, maybe uniquely so. The investigators, since the initial, what I say, in my opinion, was the wrong way to come out of the box in this situation, after that, they have said almost nothing because it's all being presented to a grand jury. That level of secrecy is rare, but is righteous. That's how it should be until the grand jury figures out whether it's going to hand up an indictment or not. And then the investigators have more of a clear path, as do anybody who wants a FOIA request or to get more information. So that is a semi-secretive proceeding. The fact that nothing's coming out is not necessarily suspicious. The early indication, I think, triggered a lot of people. I think rightly so, especially Nolan Wells' family. But that's my opinion. I put it to the side. Germane to your case or your concern, that conversation from the sweetened audio where there's one voice calling Cito, I have an account, we've got a little problem. Kid doesn't sound panicked. Is very pro forma, saying he has an account because they charge you different things if you have an account or if you don't. And then there is a background conversation which sounds terrible. Sounds like there's blaming and about Nolan waking up, and Nolan may well be there by the nature of this conversation.
Cito Assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the water coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles? Hello?
What'd you say? Hey.
Yes. How far is the water coming up, sir?
It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now.
What is your position on the veracity of that sweetened audio?
So let me address a few things that you said there, and then I certainly will address the audio. There were more than 20 people between those two boats that witnessed what happened between those two boats that were on those vessels. There are, in fact, pictures of who was on those vessels and video of who was on those vessels. There were also a lot of people that were in the water. Like when we're talking about the aid that my client provided to the distressed vessel, it wasn't way out in the water. It literally was while they were still anchored next to Horn Island. So
Understood.
you're talking about dozens of people that saw what happened there.
Understood, which makes sense because an experienced boater, which these kids are, they go to the island all the time, they fish all the time, they're around boats. You don't take off if you're taking on water. You try to figure out what it is and what to do about it before you leave. I mean, I've been in exactly that position. It makes sense that it would have happened while they were still stationed.
So, and so let's also, as we talk about the audio, acknowledge what you said about why investigations stay quiet the way that they do. Because I actually think the audio is a great example of why investigations stay quiet. That audio gets released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. A version of it, it's not clear that that was the original audio. And then people take it and try and pick it apart. So you have mentioned enhanced audio and different things that people have heard. It's worth noting that there's been more than one source of quote unquote enhanced audio. That audio appears in different lengths, that different forensic experts have said that there are quote unquote artifacts that were added to the enhanced audio, that music was removed from the enhanced audio. And so all of those things should create a degree of skepticism. The other thing that I would say is that if you listen to even the enhanced audio, and News Nation had a guy on recently, Robert Freed, who talked about this, who is an audio expert. You know, if you listen to it without the transcript that some people have put on top of it, even the enhanced audio is garbled mess. And so what I would say is, you probably are aware of this. There's all sorts of scientific research on this about the way the human brain processes and offers preference to certain types of input. There's a visual input preference over an auditory input preference. There was a famous experiment done around this, Chris, where two groups of people were put into separate rooms with a noise that didn't say anything. And they were told, one group was said that the noise was the word green needle or words green needle, and the other was told that it was the word brainstorm. And they got put back together, and they both swore vehemently that they had heard either green needle or brainstorm because they had that visual cue. So I think there's a reason that reputable outlets have chosen not to run enhanced audio, because if you're a reputable outlet, you try to figure out who put this together. Did they start with the original so that we know it wasn't corrupted from the beginning? Is there evidence of corruption that we can detect? Are the links the same? Mm-hmm. Does that person have bias? These are the questions you'd want to know before you put something in front of people with a written transcript that tells them what they should be hearing and then allow it to mislead people. We put zero stock in enhanced audio, quote unquote, enhanced audio. And I think that there's a reason that reputable outlets, and candidly, a lot of reputable audio experts, are saying that people shouldn't either.
Just like everything else, sometimes it's good, sometimes it isn't. I've seen multiple versions. The one that is getting the most traction is a black female who seems to be well-versed in audio editing, and she goes into great detail of what she did, and then it has this background conversation. I have used sweetened audio or audio sweeteners, not just for simple editing purposes here, because obviously my voice is near perfect, but in making things clearer in audio. For example, there is an infamous / famous recording of one-time Trump attorney / bagman / confidant Michael Cohen having a conversation with then citizen Donald Trump about certain payments to certain women. And we used audio sweetening to bring out the voices. It can be done. It can be done forensically. It can be done well. Here is the good news. It doesn't matter about anything that I'm saying, or frankly, counsel is saying up until this point. Does your client say he was part of a conversation on that boat about what was done to Nolan Wells and what kind of situation Nolan Wells was in?
No, I mean, we have been vehement that Nolan Wells was never on my client's boat, and my client never saw Nolan Wells on anybody else's boat. That my client has no idea the circumstances that led to Nolan Wells' death, that he did not cause or contribute to the circumstances that led to Nolan Wells' death. And look, the family has also been very clear that they understand the tremendous grief that Nolan Wells' parents are experiencing, that the Ocean Springs community is experiencing, candidly, that his friends are experiencing. And they understand the demand for answers. They understand why this process has to be done thoroughly, why investigators have to turn over every rock. And to that end, I would just tell you that certainly in the case of my client, and certainly in the case of some of these other young men, based on conversations that I've had, they cooperated fully with authorities from the very beginning of this process. I think the only thing that my client and others have asked for is not to arrive at a verdict in a way that is pre-drawn, but instead to wait on facts and evidence before you convict someone in a court of public opinion, because the consequence of that is that you're ruining people's reputations. The consequence of that is that you're subjecting people to actual physical threats and violence. And that's not the way that our system should work.
Has it slowed down? How is your client handling it?
I would tell you that, he's a 21-year-old, kid's the wrong word, because I know that's a grown man, but like, you can remember being 21.
He is a physically grown man. He is not an emotionally or cognitively grown man. I've got one at home. In fact, I've got two at home, one male, one female in that age range. I see them as children within the eyes of the law, obviously adults.
Right. And I'm not suggesting that's not true, but I am suggesting that you and I both remember what it was like to be 21. And this is devastating. Now, I will say to his credit, I think this would be devastating to somebody that's 45 or 60. Mm-hmm. To have these kind of accusations being bandied about without evidence. To his credit, he is an incredibly mature, candidly wise young man.
Well, this kind of situation makes you grow up fast. But just for the benefit of the audience, as a simple colloquy, you just stated there were multiple witnesses to attest to this one way or the other. Your client was not on a boat with Nolan Wells. He knew Nolan Wells. He was not with him. When your client got on the boat to help, Nolan Wells was not there. True?
That's correct.
Your client was not present when anything happened to Nolan Wells. Is that true?
Yes.
Your client was never part of a conversation where other people were panicked about what had happened to Nolan Wells.
That's correct.
And no one saw your client with Nolan Wells while the boat was leaving.
Yeah, I mean, certainly not to my knowledge. I can tell you that he wasn't with him. Well,
So then it doesn't really matter what the sweetened audio says unless there was another guy with the same name as your client who was on that boat at a different time. Other than that, because the CTO call is happening while he's there. So unless it's patched together from different moments, your suggestion is it cannot be accurate.
Yeah, I will just say again that my client had nothing to do with the death of Nolan Wells, has no knowledge of the circumstances of Nolan's death, and it was no way involved in covering up or concealing any information that would be relevant to investigators figuring out what happened to Nolan.
Have the investigators come back to your client?
He's talked to the investigators. I'm not sure what you mean by come back to him.
Like, have they had follow-up questions for him on more than one occasion after they asked for his initial statement and cooperation?
Yeah, I think he talked to different sets of investigators. And I want to be very careful that I don't insert my own speculation. Mm-hmm. But my appreciation is that he's talked to different sets of investigators. As an example, the DMR form that shows that he was identified as one of the two boat owners, which has been misinterpreted by some people. He let DMR officers onto the boat to take the GPS and all of that. Those would be investigators that would be separate from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Mm.
Does your client remember the last time he saw Nolan Wells at the event? Obviously, he knew he was part of the group, even though he wasn't with him specifically because it was multiple people, multiple boats. Does he remember the last time he saw him there?
Yeah, what I would say on that is he has told me that he did see Nolan that day, but that they really didn't interact that day. One of the things to appreciate here is that my client is 21 years old. He did play football with Nolan Wells in high school, but he was 3 years older than Nolan. And so certainly my client would consider Nolan a friend, but it wasn't the same sort of level of relationship. They didn't go out there together that day.
Understood. There is also a suggestion that your client knew the woman being called Katie, who may have been with Nolan Wells, may have been his reason that he didn't want to go home with the buddies who brought him.
Yeah, and so there have been a number of just purely made up things, and this is one of the more egregious purely made up things. What happened in this instance, Chris, is that somebody literally went and pulled a picture of my client with a young lady that was several years old, and then misidentified the young lady as someone named Katie, who, according to other witnesses, Nolan was speaking to that day. Mm-hmm. the problem with this level of speculation, which has gone on to, essentially that my client had a relationship with this person named Katie, and it created jealousy that Nolan was speaking to her, and that is evidence of motive. The problem with that line of reasoning is that the person in the photograph, upon which the entire theory is based, is not in fact someone named Katie. And let me say this, because some news organizations have covered this point as if it's a he said, she said debate. Journalists are capable of actually figuring out who is in the photograph. There are people that they went to high school with who can tell you who's in the photograph. The young lady's mother can tell you who's in the photograph. The young lady can tell you who's in the photograph. We've chosen not to use her name because we don't want her to face the same ridiculous level of scrutiny and craziness that's going on the internet. But this is not a he said, she said. Like, this is a verifiable fact that the person in the photograph that's been used to create this crazy theory is not someone named Katie.
Right.
And it's also a fact that Bart had never met this person named Katie, had no relationship with this person named Katie. It's just literally people pulling things out of thin air.
That's the nature of clickbait. Sometimes it's well-intentioned. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's cynicism. Most of the time, it's about clickbait for profit. And that's what works. That's what gets you the views. And you do not have the same kind of liability that I do at News Nation, or I do as a known entity, as a lot of these other people. There's not a lot of pockets to tap. There aren't corporations attached. And to that end, what we're seeing with you, Mr. Latino, is kind of the new normal, which is I'm going to hire an attorney if I'm Bart or his parents, and I'm going to go after the people who are going after me, put them on notice to cease and desist their disparaging and defamatory comments. And if they don't, I will sue them for the same. That has been your approach. Has it changed the disposition? I know one account responded by saying basically, bring it on, as if they were welcoming of that. What is your assessment of the situation and in response to that?
Yeah, I would say that ultimately issues like this aren't going to get decided on Facebook, but in a court. I would say that same individual did actually take down all of the posts related to my client.
And I can confirm.
While simultaneously inviting us to bring it on. I would also, not that it's my job to give counsel to people who may be on the other side of us, but, those posts are going to be evidence. The post in which people talk about getting rich off of the fact that they're making defamatory comments end up as evidence. And I would suggest that it's evidence that federal judges probably won't look too kindly upon.
Yeah. The impact on Bart, his life, how serious have the threats been? I know that there was a suggestion that his accurate address had been put out there. What have been the effects of the notoriety?
Yeah, and so the answer is that his address was put out there. Pictures of his home were put out there. Land plats showing where to find the property relative to other property were put out there. That's doxing. That's all in violation of some of these platforms' terms of service, but candidly, some of these platforms are slow to act on those things. Look, we believe the consequence of that and some of the things that have been put out there are the credible death threats that have been received both by my client and his family. I don't want to sensationalize those things because candidly, I don't want to invite other sickos into the fold, but they're real, and law enforcement has treated them as being real, up to and including an arrest by the FBI on Friday.
And look, it is not a secret. The account, well, there are multiple accounts, but one of them is known as Kimbra Lee, and she has said that she stands by everything she says, but the posts and the content on that page has changed the last time I checked it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there have been things removed. There's also been additional qualifications, I think, in the way that it's getting presented. We know who that person is. That is a pseudonym, but we know who that person is.
It is often a pseudonym. It is often that way. Not a lot of people want to own what they put out online.
So let me say this on there are like three levels of analysis here, right? To us at least. There's who are the defamers that are just making up things wholesale, right? And then there's a more sophisticated layer of people that we think send signals, who maybe try to skirt defamation, but actively send signals that some of these folks who are a little bit off hinge pick up on and run with. And then I think there's a third level, and whether this is moral culpability or legal culpability, we'll find out maybe. But the platforms that allow for the proliferation of very sensational conduct, defamatory statements, but candidly that have a design that not only allow for that, but that push that and that create both a profit motive for the platforms, but candidly a profit motive for the people who are creating that content.
Yep. I think, it's all relevant. And of course, the shame is that this on certain levels doesn't make sense at this point, but that's because of all the layers that have been put on top of the unknown, in my assessment. Now, I am hearing from sources that I will protect close to the investigation, that the investigators do have more information from their autopsy, not the autopsy, the secondary one that was done by the family and their agents and representatives, which was, of course, going to be less conclusive, less helpful, frankly, than the initial one, because certain things were removed and kept for later investigation, which is very normal. The suggestion that they took things and hid them so the family couldn't find things out, I see no basis for that. And certainly autopsies regularly collect tissue samples and other parts of the body for examination. You have also heard that they know things about the first autopsy.
Yeah, so what I've tried to do is not to increase or worsen a speculative environment. There are things that I know that I think the average person doesn't know.
I think there are things that I know that the average person doesn't know that are not points of speculation. One, that they found, now, and again, this could cut three different ways. They found evidence of water in tissue and cavities consistent with drowning. However, the body was also floating in the water and could have collected water. You could shoot me, I fall in the water, I could have water become the equivalent of ingested. Not that often, but it happens. In the stomach, yeah, a little bit. Depends on the condition of the epiglottis. The lungs, more common because there are more entryways that can get to it. The second is, okay, so there was water in there and he was drowned, but he had help drowning. And that the third possibility is that there was water there, but it is not conclusive. I am being told it is consistent with drowning. What that means investigatively is still open to interpretation. You've heard the same.
Yeah, so let me just say this briefly, that it's important to recall that even in the independent autopsy that has been made public, that there were no signs of defensive wounds noted by the pathologist. Mm-hmm. There were no contusions noted by the pathologist. There were no lacerations noted by the pathologist. There was no injury to bone noted by the pathologist. And so I just want to say that because I understand you're offering a hypothetical by saying you could be shot and then put in water. I want to be very clear that even the independent autopsy did not have any indications.
There is no suggestion of gross injury. I thank you for the clarification. I do not mean to suggest otherwise. I'm saying that what I have been told, that there is evidence consistent with drowning, doesn't mean that he drowned necessarily, or that the drowning was the cause of death, or the water in there was the cause of death. I'm just being open-minded because that is the most practical way to be. Subject to, I have not seen the report of the first autopsy. The second autopsy, they did find a red spot on the back of the skull, as people should be aware. What is that? It could be several different things. It could be friction. It could be rubbing. Blunt force, probably not, according to the notes as reported on that second autopsy. Could have been from sitting on itself and lividity, the pooling of fluid, blood, etc. But subject to decay and decomposition, which gives you a little bit more of a qualified analysis in the second autopsy, that they didn't see as much tissue availability and be able to analyze it because it had decomposed both before the first autopsy and since the first autopsy, and things had been done to the body in the first autopsy, which made it harder for the second one. That is my understanding of it. Also, the headline information, not surprising to me, is that he was there drinking. He was seen drinking. He was known to enjoy drinking, and that's what was going on at Horn Island. You can feel any way you want about it, but it is, as a matter of fact, what the situation was about. So the toxicology early on shows a significant level of blood alcohol, the BAC level, as they call it in the body. You have also heard that. Am I correct, counsel?
I'm going to wait till the pathologist puts out the report, and I'm going to wait till the district attorney puts out the evidence that they have. What I will say,
but safe to say is you cannot contradict me at this point.
What I will say is that I think when all of the evidence is presented, it will be overwhelming, and that it will be overwhelmingly clear from witnesses, forensic evidence, pictures, videos, that what my client has said is true. And so, what I don't want to do, Chris, and I understand that in some ways you're trying to present things that could be exonerating. I don't want to be guilty of the same thing that I'm accusing other people.
I totally get it. You are trying to not be what you oppose, and you're respecting the process. I'm fine with that. I'm just saying I'm having it both ways. This is what I've heard. I can advance what information is out there, but I am, unlike many people in this space, very wary of context. Knowing that there is water in cavities in the body, I get what it's suggestive. I get that it's consistent. I've seen this many, many, many times. It does not let me know conclusively what led to the water being in the body. That's what I'm saying. Similarly, the back find the blood alcohol content. Again, I could be drunk as a skunk and you could drown me. So now I have a very high blood level of alcohol, but I also didn't drown from being drunk. So you got to stay open. Very rarely is one piece of information dispositive of an analysis. And I believe that's where we are. And I get that they don't want more information to come out until they're ready to do it and to present it the way they want to. And I cannot question that, but for one thing, counsel, which is, again, outside the wheelhouse of your representation, but relevant to you as an officer of the court and as a citizen of the area. Coming out of the box hot, saying this is tragic, we have the body, we have no proof at this time of any foul play. There was no need to put that last part that way. They could have just said there was nothing obvious in our initial assessment of the body to explain what happened here. We are investigating. I think had they said it that way, this may not have escalated as quickly as it did.
So what I would say is I don't have the statement directly in front of me, but I think the statement was actually much closer to your version than the version that has been framed. My recollection is not that authorities ever came out and said there's just no foul play, point blank, the investigation is over.
They did not say it that way. You're right. They said so we don't have any evidence of foul play at this point. But
it's an ongoing investigation, right? And so I think, that's actually not uncommon in the sense that, like, you're able to examine a body and see that there aren't signs of defensive wounds and things of that nature. I understand your point, which is people interpret it one way. It became a narrative as to, did these folks jump to a conclusion too fast? Well, what I would tell you is this, and I just want to reiterate. I think that people have every right to be skeptical. I think people have every right to have opinions about the quality of an investigation. I would say that a learned opinion would wait to see what the investigation actually uncovered. But people have the right to have those opinions. I think where it gets dangerous is when you presuppose a verdict, when you presuppose that certain people are culpable. So I don't fault anybody for asking hard questions. I do think that we're living in a society, Chris, where it is much easier to let our ADHD or our attention deficit get the better of us because we feel entitled to answers. Like something gets us fired up as citizens and we immediately feel entitled to answers. His family's entitled to answers. The people in the community are entitled to answers. There should be transparency, but there are a lot of people who view themselves as internet detectives, and their sort of short attention spans are so consuming that instead of waiting for facts, instead of waiting for evidence, instead of waiting for the investigation, they create their own theories, their own facts that are completely baseless. And I think that's dangerous. And candidly, it's not just dangerous to people like my client. It's dangerous to the process. Let's assume in a case that there's actual foul play, whether it's this case or any other case. If you've got 100 theories that have been put out and then debunked, you arguably have created reasonable doubt if the investigators actually believe that there's something and someone to go after. I think that people need to think about this, not in terms of just the damage that they're causing to individuals who are innocent and are being wrongfully accused of stuff. I think they also need to think about it in terms of the damage to the process itself.
Yeah, I think that there's been an erosion over a long time. I think it's a balancing interest. For instance, I believe that other than some cases involving minors, I think there should be cameras in every courtroom. Why? Because I'm older than you and pretty much everybody watching this right now. But I remember when it was trust but verify. We are not there anymore. As a lawyer, as an officer of the court, as a longtime journalist, we're not there anymore. People don't trust me. They don't trust you. They don't trust these cops. They don't trust anything. And we understand why. Good reason, bad reason, no reason. We are where we are. Now I believe it's the reverse. You've got to have transparency. You've got to let people into not the investigative process, of course, but we have to err on the side of transparency. And now you have a revenue model that is based on speculation. I have no problem with curiosity. I have no problem with people saying, oh, this Russ Latino, man, he answers everything like a lawyer. I don't know. I don't know that I trust him. That's okay. That's a fair opinion. Lawyers are a little cagey. You can feel that way about it. And I don't like that Bart isn't speaking from, okay. And I don't know that I believe I heard something. It's all good. It's all fair game. There is a line that no longer exists, which was, yeah, but you're saying something as a matter of fact that is really just an opinion and is based on something that isn't true, that you know isn't true. That is now a common consideration, and it is all over the place. I believe it's actually, believe this or not, Russ, this will be hard for you because this is your world. It's better here than it is in politics. It's better here. You've got a better shot at defending yourself here than you do in politics.
Yeah, and that may very well be true. And also, I could care less if somebody looks at me and says he's a lawyer, so I'm not going to trust him. People can say whatever they want. I care an awful lot about the process being legitimate. I care an awful lot about the things that I think have made this country great. And, we talked about this on your program, but we're celebrating 250 years. And Chris, if I'm honest, I'm worried about whether or not we get another 250. Because a lot of the bedrock concepts that I think did make this country great, if you're talking about the rule of law, if you're talking about the presumption of innocence, if you're talking about due process, those things are being dramatically eroded by a culture that wants answers now or that sees things like this, a tragedy like this, as a game or a form of entertainment or a way to make money. And I just worry about our ability to persist as a culture if adults like you, candidly, don't step up and say, there's got to be nuanced thought. These things have to be based on evidence. We can't jump to these kinds of conclusions and ruin people's lives. I've said this from the get-go before I ever was contacted by anybody about this case as a lawyer, that like, look, if there was foul play, somebody needs to be held accountable. I just don't think you start with that assumption and then crucify people.
Yes, I do. We differ on this, that I believe the way the initial statement they put out, I don't think was worded the right way. I think it could have been done a different way. Now, this is stylistic, yes, but I think it had an emotional impact on members of the community, specifically the family, and probably a significant number of other black folks. Why? Well, there's another layer to this. I haven't even said the word yet. Mississippi. And you're from there. You take it a certain way. It's personal to you. It's bothersome to you. As someone not from Mississippi, been there many times, covered things that's happened there many times, you have an overlay of, oh, yeah, the black guy. You know, you flip it and there's one white guy who goes out with a bunch of black guys. Forget it. It'd be all over the place. But now people are wrong to want to know what happened. There's a lot to this that becomes a burden on the system, but also just proof of watching it. The overlay, the cultural overlay of this is Mississippi. If you flip the color ratio, everybody would be taking it seriously. But now everybody's being too sensitive. That's not fair, especially in this place and with this population. How does that hit you? Not as a lawyer, but as a denizen of the community.
So I think you said that some of that narrative would be bothersome to me. I mean, I think there are parts that are bothersome, but maybe not the ones that you would assume. Nobody in Mississippi denies the history of this state. People are very cognizant. In fact, we're reminded constantly of the history of this state. And it's dark. And we understand the tentacles of that darkness persist today. That there's skepticism today because of that. What I would tell you is that the community that you're talking about in Ocean Springs, is a community where you've got people like Nolan and like his friends and like Javon and Trayston who are just friends, and that see each other that way. And so I think to the extent there's been frustration, it's been a lack of recognition that these young guys were actually good buddies. And some of the assumptions that are based in things that happened in the 1950s or 1960s are in fact no longer representative of Mississippi, right? I think that there is a universe in which you can recognize the past and because of the past, understand why there's skepticism or a lack of trust. But the past is not evidence. The past might generate that skepticism, but by itself is not evidence. And I think you've got to factor in the truth that Mississippi is a state with about 37% of our population that is African American, that there are millions of positive interactions, on a weekly basis between white citizens in Mississippi and black citizens in Mississippi in a way that candidly probably don't exist in states that are more monolithic, that don't have that diversity of population. And so I don't think anybody here is trying to run away from the past. I think what people here would say is you got to recognize and give some context to the fact that things have changed, that there has been progress. And you also have to recognize that none of these communities are homogenous, right? And I'd say this in a broad way, 360,000 Union soldiers died in the Civil War, right? Schwerner and Goodman were two white kids who died aside Cheney trying to get voting rights in Mississippi, during that period of the Civil Rights era. You've got hundreds of examples of white Southerners that fought for civil rights. And I shouldn't say hundreds, of thousands, right? That fought for civil rights. And so anytime, like, one, I think it's problematic to suggest that because things happened in the 50s and 60s, that it's emblematic of what's happening today. That's problematic by itself. But it's also problematic to ignore that even in those dark periods, you had an awful lot of white citizens that fought alongside black citizens for civil rights that recognized the inequity or inequality that was occurring in the culture.
Not everything is one way, and it can definitely fuel the suspicion of the moment. Even if there were rampant racism going on right now in Mississippi, doesn't mean that that's what this case is about. And the burden of due process and the belief in due process doesn't change and shouldn't change. I get that there were suspicions about that based on the initial statements about what happened here from the authorities. But that's just one statement, as you suggest, taken a little out of context. I think it could have been worded differently, but that's neither here nor there. The family, as long as they're kept in the loop and treated right by investigators, and they're meeting the standard of giving it to a grand jury, which I get. Some people have a problem with that. I don't know why. If what you want is due process, then they give it to it, even though some will say, well, it's pro forma. They go to the grand jury with everything. Okay, well, they're doing it here. So we'll see what happens with that step. And that is really all that matters, is what happens when that grand jury makes its final assessment.
I think that the idea of submitting this to the grand jury, I think Angel has, the DA here has a protocol where she submits every death that is not a natural cause death, a car wreck, a heart attack, to a grand jury, in part because she wants to be sure that this is a process of integrity. And so I do think a lot of people are probably reading into that. I wouldn't read much into that either direction.
Yeah, look, ordinarily, I started off as one of them. Why? Because a prosecutor is supposed to have a good faith basis for thinking there may be probable cause in going to a grand jury. If you were to have a dispositive finding that this was a drowning or an accident or whatever, then you don't have a good faith belief that there's probable cause. Then I learned that this DA goes with pretty much everything that doesn't scream heart attack or old age home. And I get it, that you're right. It doesn't mean anything one way or the other, but it does mean that the normal process is not being subverted.
Yeah, no, I think she's following the same protocol and treating this case the same way she treats every case.
And, we'll see. They're not quick processes, but it shouldn't take forever. And I think the sooner that there are answers, the better in this. And as I said to you before, and I will say it again, you are welcome to this platform for any significant advances in your understanding in your case. And I appreciate you taking this opportunity.
Yeah, for having me on. And candidly, thanks just for your fairness in this process. I mean, I think that there are outlets that get clicks and watches by being sensational, by reframing things. And my sense is that you're actually pursuing the truth. And I think that's all anybody could ask, whether we're talking about the Wells-Wansley family or whether we're talking about the community or some of the kids that have been, in my view, maligned unfairly without evidence. Like, the truth matters here, and we really appreciate you pursuing it.
Well, look, as the shirt says, I'm different. My business model is this. I'm okay being less successful if there's an integrity to what I'm doing. And I think the space needs it. I really believe true crime may be the last best opportunity for us to debate what matters in our society without the overlay of right and left, just right and wrong. That's why I got into it, because I really think, man, you can't talk politics anymore, but here, what matters? Due process. But race is involved, forensics are involved, culture is involved, investigative tactics are involved. There's a lot here that matters. And in fact, it matters more than a hypothetical or a political debate or an exaggerated circumstance. It's real. Someone's gone. A life is lost. A light is out. And this was a good kid, and it was a family that did the hardest thing in the world, which is to get a young male through high school and into college, whose brain was good and his heart was good. And everybody says beautiful things about Nolan Wells. And it must be torture for the family to not know what happened, to raise a good student, a good athlete, and most importantly, a good person. It's terrible. And God forbid I ever have to live it, but I certainly have seen it lived too often. So it deserves answers. They deserve that dignity. And I believe this is all part of that process. So thank you for helping me be part of the process of understanding what happened and not just what some people may want to have happened. Appreciate it, counsel.
Thank you.
I have no reason to be suspicious of anything that we just heard. Am I open to other suggestions? Yes. About Bart Edmiston? No, not on the basis of what we are assessing. I believe I understand what happened on the boat. I understand why he was there, what he did, what was seen, what was heard. And I do not have any reason to believe the sweetened audio at this point. Does that mean that nothing bad happened to Nolan Wells? Absolutely not. You cannot say that with any reasonable certainty, even knowing what I'm hearing about the initial autopsy findings. That does not lead me any closer to knowing how this happened. But it is really important that just because I don't know doesn't mean I should blame people without basis. That does not help my understanding. In fact, it probably hurts my understanding because now I'm going to have a bias that I have to overcome. And I think there are too many people with too many biases and not enough overcoming. And I think Nolan Wells was a tragic episode in life and is a tragic episode in death. And I think his parents have every reason to be agonizing over the unknown. And I do believe that they were not unreasonable in being triggered by what first came out of the investigators. Counsel and I disagree about that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's right. You can decide that for yourself. You can be the judge. But you would absolutely want answers if you were they. You would absolutely be unsatisfied at this point if you were they, and so would I. So we have to see what the investigation yields. And look, these people online, I'm kind of spare about whose name I put out there and why. You heard the name of the account. Look, all I'll say is this. She can say whatever she wants. She's getting a lot more followers. She's getting paid. She changed the content on that page. She can tell you why. I can tell you why I think she did it. And I think you know the answer to that. I give it to you straight. I give you what I know. I tell you what I don't know. I tell you what I've seen before. There's a story about me and the audio sweetening. I've used it. What I told you is true. And that will always be the case. If I don't know, I'll tell you. If I do, I'll tell you if I think that it doesn't burden somebody whose confidence I have to keep. That's part of the job as well. One thing is for sure. There are questions to answer in Nolan Wells. The family deserves it. He deserves it. And frankly, we deserve it. So let's get after it. I'll see you next time.